South Korea and Japan hold their 10th round of talks on the comfort women in Seoul. But what were the results? The Maldives has revoked their state of emergency, plus Afghans come out for and against the Islamic State. These stories are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. Greetings and salutations, my excellent friend Steve Miller here on this Thursday, November 12th, 2015. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get cracking with today's news, I'd like to offer up my words of encouragement to South Korea's high school students who will be taking their college entrance exams today. For those not in the know, the sunung is only offered up once a year and pretty much determines your fate. A high score ensures entry into a top-tier university, a sky school, meaning Seoul National, Korea University, or Yonsei University, and from there, you're a shoo-in for a great job down the line. As a result, the government has pushed back start times for their offices today until 10 a.m., and has encouraged other businesses to do so as well. Extra police are also on hand to ensure the smooth flow of traffic. One thing to keep an eye on this year, though, is to see if last year's landmark scores are repeated, where girls, on average, scored higher than boys across the board. So to those 600,000 plus taking the test today, good luck. Yesterday, the 11th of November, South Korea and Japan held their 10th round of working-level talks to resolve the long-standing issues surrounding the comfort women, or the sex slaves Japan used during World War II. The talks began in April of last year, and as a way they hopefully could boost international relations and finally put the matter to rest while there were still survivors. This also comes after Park and Abe agreed to step up efforts to resolve the matter, and as Park put it, by the end of this year. Park insists the two sides are close to a final resolution, while Abe said upon his return to Japan, both sides are still far apart. As much as Seoul would like its citizens to believe that the matter is close to being finally resolved, that really doesn't appear to be the case. South Korea's Foreign Ministry spokesman, Cho Jun-hyuk, said earlier this week, quote, "As Japan is the architect of the problem, it needs to solve the problem. The Japanese government must provide solutions which the victims can accept and our citizens can accept." End quote. Again, watchers on this issue inside Japan and elsewhere criticized the vague statement by Korea, as it doesn't really specify what restitution Tokyo needs to make to finally resolve the issue. Korea, for its part, doesn't buy into Japan's argument that Tokyo's responsibility was concluded with the 1965 treaty that normalized relations, stating that the issue of wartime sex slavery was not included. That truly is a very difficult point to sell, given the language of the treaty, and it reads like this. The high contracting parties, meaning Seoul and Tokyo, South Korea and Japan, confirm that the problems concerning property, rights, and interests of the two high contracting parties and their peoples have been settled completely and finally. So the intent of the treaty was clear, that it was to be the final payment, something orchestrated under Park Chung-hee, the current president's father, who also happened to be a high-ranking official in the Japanese military. The money that changed hands was used to develop South Korea, and Park essentially threw the comfort woman under the bus for what some say, and using air quotes here, was the greater good. When the courts in South Korea ruled that it was unconstitutional for the government to make no tangible efforts to settle disputes between survivors and Japan, it essentially said that Seoul didn't have the power to accept payment for, again, air quotes, people outlined in the 1965 treaty. That changed the rules after the fact, which is why both sides are on polar opposites of the spectrum and are using the diplomacy clause in Article 3 of the treaty. If things can't be resolved there, then they're supposed to go to arbitration. And after 10 rounds of talks and countless years of discussions, that's where things should be. An Sun-mi, director of the Korean Council for the Women Drafted for Military Sexual Slavery by Japan War, said her group would reject anything short of a direct, sincere apology and compensation. Because the South Korean government is bound by the court ruling to negotiate on their behalf, Seoul will continue pushing for those items. Japan has the legal documents on their side, saying payments are final. At this juncture, the only real option to finally resolve the matter is to remove the decision from both Seoul and Tokyo, and let an arbitration court decide how to proceed. Well, that was short-lived. The Maldives lifted its state of emergency about 1 week after it was issued, saying that security in the nation had been improved after a recent round of arrests and weapons caches located. A casualty of this entire event, which was internationally criticized, was the country's chief prosecutor, who was fired. That decision came during a late-night meeting of Parliament, with the reasons behind the sacking not given. The opposition party in the Maldives boycotted that session. Now, it is suspected that the reason behind the firing was that the former chief prosecutor may have supported the vice president, who's been arrested and impeached for allegedly trying to assassinate the president. It began as an Afghan student protest against dormitory accommodations and meal policies, but morphed into a pro-Islamic State demonstration. Students raised Islamic State and Taliban flags at Nangarhar University in eastern Jalalabad city. By raising these flags of Islamic Emirate, Caliphate, Hezb Islami, we want an Islamic State, a student said on a loudspeaker. Another student reportedly shouted, "We are tired of democracy. We want an Islamic Caliphate. We want a fair caliphate and an Islamic system." Analysts said the incident at the university raised concerns that ISIS might have a growing following among disenfranchised Afghanistan youth. If voices are raised in university in support of the Taliban or Islamic Caliphate or Hezb Islami, I think it's a weakness of the government and the displeasure of people with the government, said Afghan journalist Nazar Mohammed Mutamiin in an interview with the Voice of America's TV Ashna. But in Kabul, Afghan security forces had to fire warning shots to disperse angry protesters after some tried to storm the gate of the presidential palace. Demonstrators there were in the capital protesting the beheading earlier this week of 7 civilians, including 3 women, by militants allegedly linked to ISIS. The victims were members of the minority Shiite Hazara ethnic community, and they were kidnapped more than a month ago, and authorities found their headless bodies in the southern Zabul province over this past weekend. Protesters were chanting anti-government slogans and demanded security and safety for civilians. The participants also called for the president and his chief executive to step down, accusing them of neglecting the victims after they were kidnapped. The president called for calm and said a special investigation was underway into the incident to bring the killers to justice, saying, quote, "We want peace and progress in Afghanistan, and we all should demonstrate national unity to defeat enemy attempts to divide us," end quote. And this brings me to the same old point I always make. More must be done to undermine the Islamic State's draw. That is the only way to defeat it. Well, my friends, those are the stories today. Please take a moment and let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. The Asia Brief is a special feature of the Asia News Weekly podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. Subscribing is free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. You can subscribe on our website, asianewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application. You can also keep up with more news from the region by following Asia News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, be sure to drop us a line. That email address is podcast@asianewsweekly.net. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.